there's a big group of single elderly women in retirement who are in poverty. And, had they had a property, the amount of property would be significantly reduced.
Well, I mean, I wanted to pick you up on that because I think, you provide frank and fearless advice to people in the super industry. I'm sure that they wouldn't always like what you have to say, but the fact is the answer to every question is not more super. I mean, for many Australians, the best thing is to have a home because the best way to avoid poverty is to have a home under the tax and social security system that we have in this country. My advice, if people were asking it, would be that the super industry should have a better view on home ownership, especially for lower income Australians, because the reality is the third party groups, whether it's Rights Warner or the CIS or Grattan, are all saying there's a real problem with home ownership in Australia.
It's declining.
Property prices have exploded over the last 30 years since super has been around. And it's not good enough for the super industry just to say, look, we don't like the idea of home ownership because it doesn't suit our commercial interests. So I think it would be a much better debate in this country if the super industry was prepared to at least have a look at that issue.
It's true, and I go back to, say, Scott Pape, the barefoot investor, and I think one of his themes is that if you can own your own home and have $400,000 in your super account by the time you retire, you won't be a high flyer, but you'll have a comfortable retirement.
Yeah.
So we get conflicting advice on how much money people need, but perhaps the argument should be, or the debate should be turned around to get the home first and then save whatever you can to be more comfortable.
Exactly. And this is a very hard discussion to have because people obviously think you're a heretic if you question the way that the super system is exactly today. My experience has been, people try and bully you or try and call you all sorts of different names if you dare question the exact laws today. But the fact is, in terms of home ownership, we do need to have a debate around reversing the decline in home ownership in Australia if we're going to keep our tax and social security laws as they are. I mean, my party, which has been around for 75 years, has had a strong tradition of championing home ownership. And of course, I'm not saying that allowing people access to their super for a first home is going to solve the housing problems. I mean, that would be economic idiocy. There are supply issues in the market which need to be resolved on their own steam. But I have to say to you, I've had dozens of people write to me, constituents, some of them are mine, some of them are in other states, who said, look, I'm a 35-year-old guy, I've got, 20 grand in my super. If I can't get access to that, I'm going to forget about home ownership because it won't be possible for me. Mm. So I think to say to those people, we don't care about you, I think and to not recognise the situation that they're in, that if they're earning not a great income and this is their only pool of savings, I mean, why wouldn't they be able to get access to that capital?
Yeah, so, I've heard people in the industry saying, well, if you use super for housing, it'll just push the price of housing up. So that's obviously a caveat we'd have to look into, but perhaps it's all about targeting. If you're talking about people earning income up to, say, $80,000, average earnings, then it's much easier to set policy for those so that you're not, if someone's buying in an expensive suburb, you don't want to give them access to an even bigger home.
Yeah, this is not a policy for the silvertails. It would need to be a policy for people that genuinely have no other prospect of getting a home deposit, recognising that home deposits today are so much harder than they were to assemble 30 years ago because of the explosion in property prices.
That's true. Well, that might be fixed, of course, with the economic condition. If we have no migrants for 2 years, then I think we'll see an adjustment in prices, and that might partly solve our problem.
Well, I mean, the plan for our government is not to have no migrants for 2 years. I mean, that would not be that would not be in Australia's interests. I mean, we obviously want to try and attract the best people the world has to offer, which is why we're looking at offering entry to people from Hong Kong.
Yeah. All right. That really is in the hands of recovery from the virus, though, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. So let's move on to a couple of the other things that you've mentioned in the book. One was scale. You claimed that many super funds are effectively shelf companies. They outsource everything.
Yeah.
They don't really do anything themselves, and there are varying degrees of that. There are some funds that do everything and some that do very little. But one of the controversial things that you suggested was that we could use the future fund as a wholesale fund manager, possibly expand to 4 or 5 entities like that, and then the funds would funnel all their investments through so that they would be able to significantly reduce the fees on investments. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, if you go through the history of this, the scheme was created by Paul Keating, Bill Kelty and Ian Ross, effectively, according to the last person who wrote a book about super before me, which is Mary Eason, who was a Labor member, I think, from 93 to 96. And so they effectively designed this scheme, at the ACTU for the ACTU, whereas the prior review that had been conducted into establishing a national super scheme, the Hancock Review in 76, recommended that there should be a government backstop, effectively, or a government government administrator. So, I mean, what I've suggested is that the future fund shouldn't be a retail manager, but it could provide wholesale management to a simple government trustee. I mean, the government's already in this space. We have the Commonwealth Superannuation Corporation. We've run military schemes, the PSSAP. I mean, you know some of these schemes quite well.
The ATO has all the records.
Yeah. So, look, my view is the government should provide a basic default product through an organisation, you could call it Super Guarantee Australia, SGA, and then that could offer a cheap and cheerful product, and then outsource management, funds management, to the future fund or to another fund if they thought that they could get a better deal somewhere else. But because the future fund has investment management capability, which has proven to be successful, this is an easy thing for us to establish, and then that would, I think, get a better deal for the members.
And that would be primarily for default superannuation.
Yeah.
So people choosing, well, they just do their own thing as they do today.
We've had this debate for years about, who should get the default contributions. Do you want to have the union monopoly? Do you want to have the private funds? I mean, I think there's potentially a place for all of them to be in that marketplace. But my view is we are so heavily invested in this scheme as a nation. We need to make sure we get the best deal possible. We're compelling people to put 10% of their wages into this scheme.
Yes.
We should actually have a simple, cheap and cheerful product, which I think we would have had if the Fraser government had actually established this scheme, not the Hawke government, who actually was the Keating government that legislated it. But, I mean, I have to say it was I was sort of shocked if you read the book that Mary Eason wrote about this, I mean, I was shocked to read that effectively she said that, Ian Ross and a couple other guys basically drafted it all up and they did all the work. And I mean, this is the guy who's been at the Fair Work Commission. He's still there now. And
the genesis.
They have an agenda. They've always had an agenda.
But partly it was, at the time, there was a work claim for 4% pay rise. And I think Keating saw this as an inflation circuit breaker by replacing that 4% pay rise with 3% in super. That was from the mid-80s onwards, and then it became formalised in the SG from about 92. So you're right, it's really been an interesting journey without any pre-thinking, but it's been a successful journey in many respects, I have to say. Going back to having a single default fund, though, that's almost like nationalising default. So
the whole system is nationalised. It wouldn't exist without the Commonwealth issuing laws. I mean, this whole idea that you can't intervene in the superannuation market is hilarious. I mean, we established it. And, this is a great example of, if you go through the Hayne Royal Commission, which did a huge number on the retail funds, the COVID crisis has been a disaster for the industry funds. I mean, in both cases, you see, Margaret Thatcher's line coming to life about other people's money. I mean, it's been treated, really poorly, in my view. Because there's this principal agency thing. I mean, the funds that have done really, really quite well, you'd have to say, are the self-managed funds. I mean, it's very hard to find major systemic problems there because effectively you're seeing people running their own race.
Yeah, although I'd have to say some of the big industry and public sector funds, Australian Super, Host Plus, they've earned 5% real for 30 years. And if the main objective is to give people as good a return as we can, you'd have to give them an A plus for that.
Yeah, there's no doubt there's been some good funds, but the revelations that have come out of these processes, I think, do highlight that if your point to me is we can't establish a government default fund because that's socialism. The whole thing has been established with a view of very heavy paternalism, saying that basically, we're going to compel you to save. And then if you go back to the things that were said at the outset that the scheme would do, higher national savings, lower reliance on foreign capital, none of these things have happened. In fact, if you go through and you listen, I don't want to be too partisan here, but if you go through, but I'm a politician, I guess. So if you go back and you look at what Richard Olsen said, who was the leader of the opposition in the Senate in '92, basically he said, look, it won't increase national savings, it won't reduce, pension reliance that much, and it won't reduce Australia's reliance on foreign capital. Effectively, Olsen has been proven to be accurate.
Although it has generated a massive capital pool, which has then invested directly in a lot of Australian infrastructure. The states have divested investments, industry funds in particular, and the public sector funds have accessed some of those. All our airports, ports, toll roads are now owned by members indirectly through their super funds.
Well, let's see how they go with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, so far so good, but as you say, past performance is no guide to the future.
That's right.
So what you're saying though is that would eliminate one of the big problems of the system, which is its fragmentation and the fact that many funds are too small.
Yeah.
They don't, of course, need to disappear if they could tap into a wholesale arrangement, as you've suggested. In fact, it could be a lifeline for them.
Correct. So I'm not suggesting that we should force the closure of any particular funds, but I think we need to have radical market surgery in order to get a better deal for members. And I think we also need to cut through some of these, opaque business where people just don't understand the scheme particularly well. I think having a simple, cheap and cheerful government default would be entirely legitimate thing for us to pursue as a matter of public policy.
Okay. And what should the right level of SG be? Now, I wrote a paper on this with an actuary about 2 years ago, and it's subjective. There's no right answer. If there were no age pension at all, actuaries would tell you probably need 15 to 20% of pay to pay for retirement.
Well, you are the nation's leading actuary, so you know the answer to that question.
Well, we came up with a number between 10 and 15%, which people thought was a political response, but it was really, it's within that range.
Yeah.
The more you get superannuation to do, like if you wanted to support housing, pay for insurance, then it's probably going to tilt it higher in that range than lower.
But if people were saving 15% and that was getting, 15 to 20%, I think you've said in the past, would get people in middle Australia off the pension. That is sort of what we're wanting to do. But I don't think that's an SG rate question. I think we need actually to encourage people to save voluntarily. So Canberra should be providing all the capacity for people to save voluntarily, because we actually want people to take control of their lives and control of their futures. The whole idea that everything is run through government mandate, I think has not been particularly successful so far. In terms of the SG rate, my judgment would be the Treasury, last time they looked at this, said, look, 9% is about right when they looked at this for Ken Henry. Yeah. I think that, I'd be surprised if that view changed institutionally.
Yeah.
And I think in this environment, that's probably right.
It's true, but the 9.5% that we currently pay doesn't all accumulate with savings. By the time you take out insurance premiums, fees, and taxes, probably under 7% that's actually going towards saving.
Well, let me ask you, how low do you think we can get fees?
Well, I think crudely the average is about 1% and going down. On investments, if you had 4 or 5 massive investment funds, 500 billion each perhaps, you'd be down under 10 basis points. Whereas in a My Super fund today, they're probably paying over 50 to 60 basis points. So that investment is where big savings can be made.
Okay, so you're saying that we can get. So I know you're supposed to be asking the question, but I feel silly not being able to profile your terrific actuarial experience in the system. So effectively, you're saying if we're at 60 basis points today, we could get down to closer to 10.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that's a long way to go.
It is, and that's without looking at operations. So using technology, I'm pretty sure that we could get down further in other areas. So there's no secret, Australian Super have said their 5-year plan is to get all of their expenses down to 50 basis points. Now, 10 years ago, they were over 100. So some of the big schemes are really working in the right direction. It's a question about whether the industry as a whole needs a nudge or not.
But I mean, the industry is never going to shave, 90% of its costs unless there is a market restructure. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So
some of that's happening. They're bringing investments in-house, cutting the costs significantly.
So again, I apologise for asking you a question, but do you think that we'd get from 60 basis points to 10 basis points without government intervention?
No. But we will keep trending in the right direction.
Well, I mean, that's very encouraging, but I think we want to get, there's no case. I mean, given the scale of the expenditure through the tax expenditures that the Commonwealth provides, there's no basis for us to continue with that system if people are taking excess profits effectively from a compulsory system. I mean, there's nothing else that we do in Canberra where we are so invested in what the private sector is doing in a day-to-day sense than in super. So that's why I have to, as a relatively new legislator, that's why I push back heavily on this idea that more market intervention in super is socialism. It is not. The whole system exists because we have adopted a paternalistic approach through Australian law.
Yes, and one of the barriers to dropping the operational expenses is, in fact, changing times. The use of technology will help, but a lot of members are disengaged. We offer choice of investment strategies within a fund and then choice of fund, and we have intra-fund advice. So all of these things and insurance cost money to deliver. So people often do international comparisons and say, why can't we be as cheap as the States? Part of it is scale, but part of it is that our funds actually do a lot more than happens in other countries. But we'll come to that. I think there's a lot to go, particularly in the area of retirement. I think the funds have been very good at building money for people to retirement. But then they struggle a bit to deliver a good service when people are retired. I don't know if you've got any views on that.
Well, I mean, I'll leave the market to run their own services, but I mean, clearly we don't have a strong framework around the system, and we have, effectively a scheme which forces people to save 10% of their salary while they're working, and then obviously you come to retirement and you can do whatever you like with it. So it is a very strange system. I mean, one of the points I would make about these issues is it's been very hard to get drafting resources in Canberra to do things because obviously we're dealing with an economic shock, a health crisis. We've had a significant Royal Commission into this industry where we've committed to dealing with those things quite quickly, which is effectively a structural reform package. And it's frankly difficult to get drafting resources, time in the Parliament to legislate things which we said that we would do. Of course, we'll do them, but we can't do everything tomorrow.
Presumably, sometime in the next 6 to 12 months, we'll start seeing something on the retirement framework.
Well, I hope so. As I say, I mean, this is the first recession in 30 years. I mean, this is the first recession since we've had compulsory super. I think that's an important point for the industry to reflect upon and their role in it. I mean, I was disappointed to see parts of the super industry try and seek a bailout, just 2 months ago. And I think, as the Treasurer said, I mean, this is an industry that gets $100 billion a year of people's money. I mean, surely you don't have any issues. But as we look forward, I mean, this is a country which has shown that we can be very complacent, and it's been very hard to get changes to the labour laws and to the tax system which the country needs to be competitive. Christian Porter and Josh Frydenberg have now got processes in place to look at the tax system and our labour laws, our industrial system. And those are the most urgent pieces of business for the country in terms of the recovery, because unless we get private investment up, then there's not going to be any jobs in this country. So that is, I'm just sort of giving you a hierarchy of needs, right?
No, I think see that.
I think those things would be the most important things for our government and our parliament to pursue and spend time on. And then beyond that, I think the questions around super and its role in the economy, the rate of super and whatnot, I think those are very important issues, but I don't see them as important as fixing our labour laws and trying to get the tax system right.
No, I agree. We've got a crisis. We've got to work our way through. But do you see, as a result of that the early release could be used again in the future?
Well, I think it should be, and I think it is the early release scheme is providing access to people in an economic shock, which is their own money. And so, given we underwrite almost every Australian with a pension, it's not as if, I mean, it's just not true to say that you're taking super today and you're ruining the future. I mean, the numbers we've discussed, the numbers that are in all the Treasury modelling show that most people are on a pension. So if people really need their money now to pay down debt or pay school fees or pay for essentials, I think that is an appropriate use of that money. I don't think the industry should be too defensive about it. I mean, there are still checks and balances. My personal view on this is I would rather see an early access scheme which pushed people towards a deposit for a home, because I think, as we discussed before, the best way to avoid poverty in retirement is to have your home. If you can only have your home or your super, you're better off with a home. So I'd rather see it go into a productive asset.
And yet there are a lot of people who've got credit card debt and they're really struggling to pay their bills. And that was why the early release came out. That problem won't go away for many people. So, you and I have talked in the past about somebody, say, in a childcare worker at $40,000 a year, which is probably not enough for the nature of the job they do, but that's what they get paid. And if their SG is nearly $4,000 a year, there will be cases where paying that credit card debt off or being able to take a holiday now is more important for that person.
It is, and I know it's uncomfortable for the superannuation industry, and I'm sorry about that, but the national government has opened the chequebook through a wage subsidy, through increased unemployment benefits, and we will continue to do all we can to support people's lives. But there is a $3 trillion pool of savings there, which can also be deployed to help. I mean, at the end of the day, the most important thing I think a government can do in a crisis is try and keep the fabric of our society together, and that's what we've been trying to do. So the idea that taxpayers have an endless pool of money and that super can never be touched, I think is very unrealistic and very out of touch.
Look, I think the super industry would agree with you if there were better processes so that they could expect, this was a shock for everyone. It was thrown at very short notice. If it was formalised that these are the rules for early withdrawal in future, an extended version of hardship effectively, the industry would adjust and manage it. So I don't think they'd be negative. I think what they're worried about is, how do we know it will happen again? Can we have a bit more certainty about the rules?
I think that's fair enough. And the reality is, I mean, you look at the JobKeeper, which is one of the biggest economic policies ever deployed by a Commonwealth government. I mean, that's effectively the Treasurer building and flying a plane simultaneously. I mean, a lot of these schemes had to be pulled out of nowhere. And I think if you look at our economic performance and our health performance compared to any other country, probably apart from Canada, this is the best country to be in. And I think, our institute, this is not just paying credit to the strong leadership we've seen from the Prime Minister and the Treasurer and the Health Minister, but it's also a great credit to our public institutions, Treasury Department, the regulators that have enabled these things to work, the tax department. I mean, we've all, people who've worked in your industry have seen these people up front. I mean, one of the mistakes that we probably make on my side is we don't often thank the really serious people that go into a career in the public service and really help our country. And so you'd have to say, I mean, I'm quite proud of the way we've been able to deal with this crisis. There's obviously a long way to go, but you look at the way that it's been handled in the United States, where clearly it hasn't been handled very seriously.
Sure.
I mean, it's very troubling. And obviously we have a big economic statement next week, and I know that a lot of people that are in touch with me in my office there's a lot of anxiety about where to from here on JobKeeper and some of these big schemes. So there's a lot of pressure on the Treasurer, and we have a lot of confidence in him.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, in the book, you made a number of comments broadly under the heading of governance. So you talked about payments to unions, high marketing expenses, conflicts, the things that came out of the Royal Commission.
Yeah.
Too many industry bodies was another one.
Yeah.
Culture war is unproductive because it detracts from the purpose of superannuation, and the fact that choice is still not allowed in many places. Would you like to give us a brief comment on how do we fix all this?
So many questions in one. Look, I mean,
your topics.
Well, look, I mean, I think the issue is that there hasn't been a sufficient focus on getting outcomes in terms of getting people off the pension, which is partly the fault of successive governments. And there has been a tendency to engage in navel-gazing within the industry, right? And I accepted, I engaged with that before I was in Parliament, and it's something that I don't think was very productive. But, when you open the door and all the money falls in, I guess maybe it's hard not to sort of engage in that sort of behaviour. So I think there has been a real cultural problem. But I mean, this is a good opportunity for everyone to come together in a recession. As I say, this is the first recession since the super system was established. So, we're obviously watching very closely as to how people react and how they engage on the policy formulation side.
Okay. In terms of getting off the pension, I agree with your figures, except that, in fact, what is going to happen is a lot of people are going to move from full pensions to part pensions. Yeah. So while the number of people dependent might not change by very much, the amount of government support per person will reduce. And our very long-term projections, which of course are always rubbery the further out you go, show that we could end up with an age pension costing as little as 2.1% of GDP by the end of this century. It's about 2.6 at the moment. Now, it's much higher in most other countries. So I don't personally see that as a failure. I think the system is working. I think the reality is the number of people on the pension today is a feature of failed policies of the past. And we're now paying for the fact that they weren't able to save. But I think broadly we are online. But I agree with you that if we can make the system more efficient, then there are some things out of our control, like future investment earnings, things like fees and structures can be looked at.
Look, that's fine, but the question still is, if the system is going to cost more than it saves today and into the future, then that's not a good result for the taxpayer. So, I mean, the system, as you know, costs a bomb. So we need to find a way to reduce the cost of it. I think there was an interesting piece from Peter Van Onselen on the weekend in the Australian, where he talked about that there are some people that would like to abolish the scheme. I mean, I'm not in favour of abolition.
Sure.
I think he made a good point that you effectively deal yourself out of the debate. So I'm much more interested in making it work. I think all the while the scheme costs more than it saves. I mean, as I say, $36 billion this year. The super industry has estimated that it would save, I think, about $9 billion a year. Obviously, you can't net those figures off, but I mean, you can see even on those rough numbers that you're nowhere near the ballpark of where you need to be. So, I mean, I'd be interested in working out how we can reduce the cost of the system.
It's true. If you look at New Zealand, which for many years had no, they had a universal age pension.
And they had a vote on compulsory super. They had a referendum on it.
They did.
Yeah.
And their system is...
How did that go?
Well, because people get a full age pension, which is not means tested, they think they're going to be well off, so they don't see the need to divert any salary. But their level of support in retirement is generally weaker than ours for many people. Their age pension is lower. If we gave the full age pension to everybody, by the way, it would cost us an extra $31 billion a year. So there is definitely a trade-off. For
which is less than $36 billion that the scheme costs today.
That's true, but you've got to remember that we're trying to stop future people being on the pension. We can't do much about the ones.
Okay. So I guess what has troubled me for a long time, including when I worked here, was that the intergenerational report says that you still got 70% of people on the pension in 2050. Yeah. I mean, I think we should be getting that down towards 50%. And I think part of the objective that we should have for the scheme is we should have a target for what proportion of the population we actually want to be self-funded. I think that would help a lot.
I think you'd find that you'd need to put more money in as a contribution to get that, whether it's voluntary or compulsory.
Yeah, but what we want to see here is over the long term is we want to say, okay, we're spending this amount of money today, or we're seeing, foregone revenue today, because that's not exactly the same as spending $1, as you know.
Yeah.
So we're spending this amount of money today to get a result in 30 years, and in 30 years we're actually ahead. So that's what I would like to see. And I think that all the while you've got 70% of people taking some form of pension. Surely, that's not good enough. So we should be more ambitious. As I say, if we're going to put 10% of people's salaries and wages into super, then we want to see half the population off the pension. And effectively, if people want to have more super, then we need to increase the ambition. I think that's pretty simple.
I think that's a good point. So look, in a minute we're going to go through 2 questions from our audience.
Yeah.
But
good.
I'd like to just...
Probing ones, I hope.
I'm sure there will be. First, if I could just finish by saying that you recommended 8 key reforms.
Yes.
And if you'd like to pick 1 or 2 and...
I have to remember them.
Well, I can...
It's been 2 months.
Here we go. There's a list for you.
Well, look, if we could do one today... I think I'm quite taken by this idea of having a truth campaign. And what I mean by a truth campaign is effectively that the super industry would pay for a campaign to say, okay, this is what 9% of super will do for you. And then effectively you need to contribute, X amount of dollars more if you want to become self-funded. And I think that there is this misnomer, and especially through some of the shocking advertising you're seeing right now where people are trying to scare people. You see this sense that you'll have so much super in retirement you won't know what to do with it. I mean, the fact is, if the average balance is $150,000, that's 3 or 4 years of age pension, and then I want to see some truth in advertising and some truth telling about what the super scheme is actually going to do. I think that would really improve the quality of the conversation we have in Canberra and beyond.
Okay, and some of the other reforms?
Well, some of the other ones we've discussed. I mean, I do think that
joint accounts, for example.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, one of the things that I should mention is, I mean, I do think that there should be much more transparency around related party payments, particularly to political organisations. I mean, in the book, I've pulled apart all the AEC data, which shows the contributions that the super funds make to the union. So I think it's $11 million this year, and that balloons to $31 million by 2030. I mean, I do think that these payments should be made transparently to members. I think that there'd be members in the CBUS fund who'd be shocked that the fund is making huge payments to the CFMEU. I think equally you can make the same case for some of the other funds. And so I think these payments should be disclosed in annual reports or online. I mean, even I had ASIC, I'm a member of the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Corporations and Financial Services. And we had ASIC appear before our committee yesterday. And there's a fund called Host Plus, which has made a false disclosure or something and had to pay money out of its members' reserves. And I just sort of asked ASIC about it every time they come for the hearing. I must drive them mad. But I wanted to make sure that, you know, if they're going to be spending people's retirement savings on things like this, they need to tell them. And I think they started out by doing a media release. And I mean, people don't read media releases. And so now they've had to actually notify people through the annual report process, which I think is a much better process. So if you do the wrong thing, if you're going to pay money to political organisations like the unions, then you should be disclosing all that to your members.
Yeah, fair enough. Joint accounts, what do you think of those?
Well, I think
husband and wife.
Well, I think it'd be a good way to get fees down, and also, you know, I'm of the view we should have larger SMSFs. I mean, the basis for not having joint accounts, I assume, has been an industry-driven one to collect more fees.
Not really. No, it's more about tax. Tax is based on individuals, whereas most couples have joint bank accounts. Age pension is based on couple. So super is really, because it's an outcome of the tax system, it's based on individuals first.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's an idea that we should try and pursue. I'm sure that there's a way to net off tax. I'm sure in some cases it will be better for members to have a joint super account. But I mean, none of these things you want to make compulsory. You just want to give people the flexibility.
I think 85% of SMSFs are married couples.
Yeah.
So they use that as their vehicle to keep all their super in one spot.
Yeah. So look, I have to say, I think the SMSFs have done well. They haven't had any major reputational issues. All the reviews that they've had of those schemes appear to have given them pretty much a clean bill of health. So I think that's one of the reasons I like SMSFs is it's a good way of really taking control of your own destiny, which I think is a healthy thing. I think there's been too much principal agency cost in the super scheme.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's fair to say that financial scandals in superannuation have been fairly small, if not negligible, over the last 30 years.
Did you see the Hayne Royal Commission? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
You saw it?
I did.
Okay.
But I'm talking about over 30 years, the scheme of money lost has been relatively small. That fee is a different subject.
I have to pick you up on that. I think the Hayne Royal Commission, particularly where funds went on and admitted under oath that they were putting the shareholders ahead of members. I mean, it was awful. Ridiculous.
I meant more investment losses, but I take your point. A lot of funds.
I'm sure there have been investment losses we don't know about.
Yeah.
I'm sure there have been.
Yeah.
There's plenty of opportunities in the future to pursue that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to the questions then. Andrew, if you're ready.
I'm ready.
So we've got the Royal Commission and Productivity Commission both recommended a default once model. The government hasn't yet responded to that. Do you think that's a priority for the government?
I think addressing the market structure in super will be a priority in this term. Yes, I do.
Right.
I think there are a range of models and options on the table. I mean, I've obviously suggested in my book Bad Egg that we should pursue a government default fund, which would basically break the need to do that. I mean, you could basically default once into the scheme you start in, which would be the government scheme, unless you move out of it. But I think there'll be an active discussion inside the government about where to go on that front, and it's something that I think we should have ideally dealt with earlier, but it wasn't possible to deal with before.
Okay, so after this crisis, it'll be on the agenda.
Well, I think we've had a period of political stability, which has been great, I think, for the country. But there has been people would know, there's been a 10-year period of numerous political assassinations, which has made some policy agendas more difficult than they should have been.
Okay. So I've got a prominent Sydney superannuation lawyer who said part of the problem with competition and the confusion in super could be that products bundle investment and insurance. If we separated those, would that lead to greater clarity and enhanced competition?
Taking insurance out?
Yeah, maybe have some different type of insurance structure. In other words, don't take it away, but separate it from super.
Well, I have to say I'm a big supporter of financial advice. I mean, I am a user of financial advice myself, which I think is a good thing. And I think I've suggested to the FSC in the past that it might be a good idea to try and take members of Parliament through the advice process, because it is a good thing to do if you're getting high quality advice.
Yeah.
And I think insurance is one thing in my experience that, I represent New South Wales, so I'm very aware of the size of Sydney mortgages and school fees in some cases. And, the coverage you provided in your super fund won't last you for,
right.
more than a couple of days, to be honest. In many cases, I'm being silly, but we want people. Look, my personal opinion on this is, on insurance, we actually want people to get advice. The group cover, I'm sure, has been useful in providing some people with some baseline coverage, but for people who are really at risk, if they were to die or were to have a major accident, that's not going to.
No, it's true. And look, I think the funds themselves could provide a lot of this advice. So obviously, we've got intra-fund advice, we've got single issue advice.
Yeah.
I have to say, personally, I think we should have a good look at the financial advice legislation. I think it was written years ago to eliminate poor product selection, and where it deals with strategy, how much do you need, where should you go, it's very prescriptive, and so the cost of advice is too much for most people to pay.
Look, I tend to agree. It's a difficult issue, financial advice, but it is something that we want to make sure that is accessible and affordable. And it is a very heavily regulated sector for various reasons, and it needs to be. But I'm sure that there are ways that we can improve. I mean, for example, one of the things I'm doing in the Parliament is chairing an inquiry into fintech and regtech.
Yeah. And
one of the things that we're doing in the regtech space is looking to find ways to make laws technology neutral, so that rather than me having a requirement that says, okay, I've got to give you this piece of paper in person, I can deliver that to you digitally. And these are the things that have been in two hard baskets for years. I mean, the Corporations Act was written in 2001. The idea of sending around paper and having physical AGMs and having these wet signatures and all that sort of stuff is just something that I think we can finally sweep away in this pandemic. The Treasurer has already made temporary relief available on some of these fronts, but what our report will do next month, if the committee agrees, it will set out some more evidence for making all these changes so that there is tech neutrality. I mean, my understanding in the advice space is if there was more technology neutrality, that could actually make the cost of delivery lower.
Yes. I think people are looking for a sign of something like that.
Yeah, well, that's coming.
Yeah.
We actually do work, So
Oh, no, I know.
People are always surprised.
Yes. You look at Hansard every day.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah. The super industry obviously wants to be involved in rebuilding the country's economy and infrastructure. Do you think it can play a bigger role in that?
I think if it's constructive. I mean, there are clearly people in the super industry that have wanted to, make ambit claims like asking for bailouts, and that sort of takes away your credibility, I think, to be a person at the table. But I mean, clearly for the super industry to be able to demonstrate how it can help in recovery, and that would be very, very welcome. The sole purpose test obviously precludes some activities, but my sense is, a super fund investing broadly for its members can certainly help in the recovery. I mean, one thing that the super funds, I think, could do is rely less on intermediation. I mean, there's so much intermediation and costs. I mean, the costs you spoke about before, which is really quite enormous. I mean, where funds feel comfortable investing in Australian companies without all the intermediation, I mean, that would be a positive thing. But look, I'm not in favour of directed investment. There are certainly people in Canberra that would like to see, 10% of super go to farms, 10% of super go to annuities, 10% of super go to, the Lost Dogs Home, and that is a sort of recipe for sort of Banana Republic.
We used to have the 30-20 rule.
Yeah. I mean, we want to be Australia, not Argentina.
Yep. I think everyone would agree with that.
Yeah.
Now, quick question for you on a different subject. You were quoted in the paper today saying that you'd like to see Australia become a financial centre. Now, this goes back to work that the FSC did and Johnson report before that. What's the chance of that happening, Andrew?
Well, I mean, I'm surprised to see Hong Kong collapse before our eyes as a credible financial centre. I mean, that's what's happened. So there is a great opportunity for us to move ahead of Singapore and to try and capture some of that business. And effectively, that is a very small window. My hope is that in the budget, the Treasurer can look to deploy some of these measures. But effectively, it comes down to providing some certainty around relocation. And that could be licensing processes, for example. That could be that you could recognise a Hong Kong licence here in Australia and fast-track that. There's clearly a need for us to, again, look at our corporate tax rate. There is clearly the need for us to look at tax incentives and to provide tax certainty to funds and to executives and people who want to relocate. Yeah. And we need to resolve the rest of these Mark Johnson recommendations. I mean, one of the reasons it's taken so long to progress these changes is because there are parts of the bureaucracy that resist market-oriented changes, and that's because they have no experience dealing with markets.
So that will be a priority for you as well.
Well, I mean, as I say, we try and do. I just thought that given the work that I've been, associated with for a long time, and as a senator for New South Wales, the state of New South Wales has handled this pandemic, I think, very well, and it's a unique opportunity for us to try and push to get some of that investment and jobs from Hong Kong into Sydney. So that is effectively a one-time opportunity, which I hope that we will be able to grasp.
Sydney and perhaps Melbourne and Brisbane as well.
Look, I love all my constituents equally, but I think Sydney is Australia's financial centre, and that's why we're here today. And I'm very keen that we get the lion's share of that growth. I mean, Singapore, is actually a great friend and ally of our country, and we do a lot with Singapore, militarily, economically, culturally. But they run their country like a business. I mean, that's like Singapore Inc. And we are not organised that way. And look, I understand that we have a messier democracy. We have a louder, messier democracy, which we love, and that is magnificent. But we've got to be really smart and quick on this, because I can't believe. I mean, I can't believe that Hong Kong is. I'm surprised that Hong Kong is finished. But I mean, why would you invest a cent there?
Well, there'll be competition for the replacement.
Maybe you could put the next Rice Warner office there.
Get 12 for that, Andrew. Look, thank you for that. That's been a stimulating debate. Just before we close, do you have any passing comments in conclusion for the industry?
Well, look, I mean, I think the industry obviously does a great job in looking after people's lives and helping them save for retirement. I mean, my only advice really is keep engaging on all the key policy agendas. It's very important that people buy into the difficult and uncomfortable territory, whether it's housing or whether it's the guarantee debate. You've got to put forward a credible position, and it's got to be always. I mean, the most important advice is this. I mean, everything that you should do should be cloaked in what's the best thing for the nation as we track through this recession. That is the most important thing.
Thank you for your time.
Nice to see you.
I'd like to say to everybody that's been a very stimulating discussion with one of the next generation of political leaders I think that, and I mean, Andrew, you mentioned Sir Richard Alston. I actually worked for him when he was in opposition back in the early 90s. And it's been intriguing to see the number of people that have come and tried to put their point of view on our system. But I agree with you. It's time to reflect. If we could have some objectives, if we could have some guidelines on areas like insurance and early release, I think we could make this system even better than it is today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for your time.